The forest had a way of swallowing sound. Even in the daylight, when the sky was pale and the crows muttered in the high branches, there was a deep, listening quiet beneath the trees. It wrapped itself around anyone who stepped inside, soft as moss, heavy as a held breath. People from the nearby village kept to the narrow paths and never lingered after dusk. They spoke of old things in the woods, half in jest, half in fear, and they shut their shutters firmly against the darkness each night. At the edge of this forest stood a weather-beaten cottage, its walls leaning slightly as though tired of standing. The thatched roof sagged in places, the chimney leaned at an angle, and the door creaked even when no one touched it, complaining quietly to the empty air. Smoke only rose from the chimney on the better days, the rare ones when there was wood enough to burn and food enough to cook. In this cottage lived a woodcutter, his 2 children, and his second wife. The woodcutter had once been stronger, straighter, full of a quiet sort of hope. Years of poor harvests and lean winters had bent him, though, as surely as wind shapes a tree. His hands were thick with calluses and scars, his back stiff, his eyes lined with worry. He loved his children more than he understood how to say. Love, he'd learned, did not always put bread on the table. Hansel was the elder of the 2, a boy with watchful eyes and a mind that never seemed to be still. He listened more than he spoke, and always seemed to be thinking, as though he could puzzle the world into making sense if he tried hard enough. Gretel, a little younger, had quiet courage and soft hands that were quick to help. She saw more than others realized, and she felt things deeply: sorrow, fear, hope, like ripples in a pond that never quite settled. Their stepmother was not cruel in the way of wild beasts or violent storms. Her cruelty was a colder thing, sharp and thin like a blade of ice. She had once been pretty, and sometimes, when she caught sight of herself in a warped bit of tin or a darkened window, she still searched for that younger version of her face. Life had not been kind to her either, but where their father had bent and grown gentler, she had hardened, like earth baked dry. It was the winter that changed everything. Snow came early that year, drifting down before the harvest had properly finished. The village fields yielded little, and the forest, where the woodcutter worked, grew stingier with its gifts. Trees seemed harder to fell, kindling was damp, and game grew scarce, as if the animals had decided to abandon humanity altogether. Each day the woodcutter came home with his shoulders slumped, boots dragging, cheeks hollowed by cold and worry. The children knew hunger as a familiar companion. Their bellies grumbled, their heads ached, and the world took on a faint gray haze when they stared too long at the empty shelf where bread used to sit. Their stepmother counted each crust, each handful of flour, each turnip and shriveled carrot, her lips pressed into a thin line as she did sums in her head that never seemed to come out in their favor. One evening, when the wind gnawed at the door and the last scraps of daylight had drained from the sky, the stepmother waited until the children had retreated to their small corner of the cottage. Hansel and Gretel shared a bed pushed against the wall, a thin straw mattress, and a single worn blanket stretched over the both of them. They lay side by side, pretending to sleep as the grown-ups. Voices drifted through the dim room. The stepmother's voice came first, a low hiss edged with desperation. "We cannot feed them any longer," she said. "Listen to me. There is barely enough bread for us as it is. 2 more mouths, 2 growing bodies. We are starving ourselves to keep them alive, and still there is not enough." The woodcutter's answer was soft, heavy. "They are children. My children. What would you have me do?" "What is left to do?" she shot back. "We are at the end. The cupboard is nearly bare. The flour sack is almost empty, and the last of the wood burns in the hearth as we speak. When that is gone, what then? Will love fill our stomachs? Will we drink the sound of their voices instead of water? You think the winter cares that they are your children." Hansel lay perfectly still, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Beside him, Gretel's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. He reached under the blanket and found her hand, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, fingers cold. The woodcutter tried again, his voice cracking. They will grow. They will help. Hansel is already strong enough to carry wood. Gretel. They do not help us now, his wife snapped. They take from us now. Every day I watch what little food we have vanish into their mouths, and still they look at me with those hungry eyes. It is like feeding the forest itself. It is never enough. There was a long silence. The fire popped and sighed in the hearth. At least wait, the woodcutter whispered at last. Perhaps work will come. Perhaps. Work? She interrupted, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping her. From where? The village has no coin. The merchants have stopped coming. No one is paying for wood when they can barely afford grain. You know this as well as I do. There will be no work. There will be no miracle. We must do what others have already done. Hansel's breath shallowed. Others. The word hung in the air like a loose noose. Taken their children into the woods, the stepmother went on, her tone cooler now, as though she had stepped past a threshold and felt steadier for it. Left them somewhere deep, where they cannot find the way home. It is brutal, yes, but it is a clean cruelty. Better that than sit here and watch them waste away slowly with us. At least in the woods, it might be quick. The woodcutter groaned softly, a sound like a tree splitting under too much weight. You speak of abandoning them, he said, leaving them to freeze, to starve. And what do you call this? She demanded, gesturing around the dim, barren cottage. Look at them. Listen to your daughter's breathing, thin and tired. Look at your son, all sharp edges and hollow cheeks. You think this is kinder than the woods? Hansel squeezed Gretel's hand again, more tightly now, as though he might anchor her to him by force alone. He could feel her trembling through the thin blanket. He wanted to shout, to burst from the bed and throw himself between his father and stepmother and say, No, no, you must not. We will help. We will eat less. We will do anything. But some quieter, colder part of him knew it would do no good. Desperation had its own logic. We must live, the stepmother said finally, her voice low and firm. You and I. If we sacrifice ourselves for them, what then? We all die. For what? For a feeling? For some idea of goodness that cannot warm us and cannot fill our bellies? You owe them survival, yes, but if you cannot give it, then you owe them a swift end, not this slow torment. Take them into the forest tomorrow, deep. Leave them. You must not look back, or you will falter. The woodcutter did not answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice seemed to come from very far away. I do not know if I can do it. You can, she replied quietly, because you must. Hansel listened until their voices faded into a heavy silence. His chest felt tight, as though a band of iron had been wrapped about his ribs. Carefully, he rolled onto his side, so that his mouth was close to Gretel's ear. Gretel, he whispered, are you awake? A small pause, then a breath. Yes. You heard? Yes, she said again, the word barely sounded at all. He hesitated. She was younger. He wanted to protect her from the truth, but lies would do her no kindness now. They mean to leave us in the forest, he murmured, the words tasting sour. But I will not let their plan work, I promise. How? She breathed. For a moment he had no answer. Then he thought of the stones that glittered near the well in the moonlight some nights, white and smooth. I will find a way, he told her. Sleep if you can. I need to wait for them to go to bed. Gretel was quiet. Then, very softly, she asked, Do you think they hate us? Hansel's throat tightened. No, he said more firmly than he felt. Father does not. He is afraid. People do terrible things when they are afraid. And her? The stepmother never had earned the word mother on Gretel's tongue. Hansel paused. In the next room, the low murmur of voices had stopped. There was only the wind and the occasional creak of the cottage settling. "She is afraid, too," he said at last. "Afraid of hunger, afraid of being poor, afraid of growing old and weak. She thinks if we were gone, she would suffer less. Fear twists a person, Gretel. It makes them hard where they should be soft, and quiet where they should speak." Gretel nodded into the dark, even though he couldn't see it. "I am afraid," she whispered. "So am I," Hansel replied. "But we will still think and we will still plan. Fear cannot stop that." He waited until the light beneath the door to the other room went dark, and the house settled into the deeper silence of true sleep. Then he eased himself from the bed, moving slowly so as not to disturb the straw. The floor was cold under his bare feet, and he shivered as he slipped to the door, lifting the latch with slow care. It groaned faintly, but no voice rose from the darkness to ask what he was doing. Outside, the night was pale and thin. The moon hung low, a chill silver coin pressed into the sky. Frost clung to the grass, making each step whisper with a faint crunch. Hansel hugged his arms to his chest and made his way to the well. The ground around it was strewn with small, smooth stones, white and round, worn by years of use. In the moonlight, they gleamed like tiny splinters of bone. Hansel knelt and began to fill his pockets, choosing stones that were bright and easy to see. There was something careful, almost reverent, in the way he did it. These were to be their thread through the dark, their secret line home. When his pockets were heavy, he stood and looked up at the moon. It stared back with its cold, distant eye, showing him little in the way of comfort. But at least it was there. At least there was a light that did not depend on the kindness of adults or the fullness of a cupboard. Back inside, he slipped beneath the blanket next to Gretel, who turned towards him instinctively, seeking his warmth. "Did you find anything?" she whispered. "Yes," he murmured. "Stones. Tomorrow, when we walk, I will drop them along the way. We will follow them home when they leave us." "And if they see?" she asked. "They will not," he said. "I will be careful. Sleep now. You will need your strength." But he did not sleep. He lay awake, staring into the darkness, listening to the faint, fragile sound of Gretel's breathing, and counting in his head. Morning came reluctantly, as though the sun, too, was tired of this world and all its troubles. The stepmother shook them awake with brisk movements, not lingering on them with any softness. "Up," she said. "There is no time to laze about. Your father is going to take you to gather wood." She handed them each a small piece of bread, a crust barely large enough to count as food. "This is all there is," she snapped, as if daring them to complain. "See that you make it last." Hansel looked at the bread, then at her face. He saw nothing there he recognized as tenderness, only a pinched sort of determination, as though she had wrapped herself in the idea of necessity like a cloak. He tucked the bread into his pocket, careful not to dislodge the stones he had hidden there. Gretel nibbled hers slowly, each bite swallowed as though it hurt. Their father could not quite meet their eyes. "Come," he murmured, "we must go while there is light." The forest waited for them like a mouth, the path leading into it like a tongue. They walked behind the woodcutter, his axe over his shoulder, his steps slow and reluctant. The further they went, the more the village retreated behind them, until it was as though the cottage and its thin trail of smoke had never existed. Hansel lagged just slightly behind, his hand slipping into his pocket. Every few steps, when his father's gaze was turned ahead and his stepmother's attention was elsewhere, he dropped a white stone onto the path. It fell with a small, secret sound and lay there, catching the faint light. Gretel saw what he was doing and felt a flicker of hope blossom in her chest, small but steady. She walked closer to him, drawing comfort from his nearness. The trees grew taller, the undergrowth thicker. Birds fluttered overhead, their calls occasional and curious, as though wondering what these humans were doing this deep in their world. The air grew colder, the light thinned, turned greenish as it filtered through the canopy. At last, they reached a small clearing where dead branches and logs lay scattered. "Rest here," their father said, his voice strained. "Gather wood for the fire." He cleared his throat. "I must go a little further to find better timber. Stay here. Do not wander off. I will come back for you soon." The words snagged on the air, unconvincing even to his own ears. Hansel looked at him then, really looked, and saw the way his father's eyes shone with unspilled tears. He saw the shame in the slump of his shoulders. He opened his mouth to say something, anything. But the stepmother's gaze burned at the back of his neck, daring him to speak against her plan. "Do as your father says," she said coldly. "Do not stray." Then they turned and disappeared among the trees. Hansel and Gretel waited quietly, watching the place where their father had vanished. The forest settled around them, branches creaking softly, a crow calling somewhere unseen. "How long should we wait?" Gretel asked after a while, her voice small. "Until the light begins to fade," Hansel said, trying to sound calm. "We will give them time to change their minds," he swallowed. "And if they do not, we will follow the stones." They sat side by side, their backs against a fallen log. The hours crept by, slow and heavy. At first they spoke in whispers about nothing at all. The shapes the branches made against the sky, a beetle crawling over a root, the way the moss felt under their fingers. Then their voices faltered and died away. Eventually the shadows lengthened. The light slipped from silver white to gray. The wind grew cooler, threading itself through their clothes like cold fingers. "They are not coming back," Gretel said at last, staring at the trees. Hansel's chest tightened. "No," he said quietly. "I do not think they are." Gretel's eyes filled with tears, spilling over despite her best efforts. Hansel put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "They have left us," she whispered. "Truly left us." "Yes," he said, because there was no kindness in pretending otherwise. "But they have done it near enough to the path that we can still return. The stones are waiting. We will go home ourselves." They waited until the last of the light was nearly gone and the first stars began to tremble into the sky. Then Hansel stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "Keep close. We will look for the stones. We will follow them like lights." The forest at night was a different world. Shapes changed. Familiar trees became tall, watching figures. The air grew still, as though everything was listening. But the moon rose, round and clear, its light catching on each stone Hansel had dropped. They glittered faintly, one after the other, marking a fragile thread through the darkness. Gretel gasped softly when she saw the first one. "It really works," she murmured, almost in wonder. "I told you," Hansel said, a little proud, a little relieved. They walked slowly, careful not to miss a single gleaming pebble. Each step took them closer to the edge of the forest, closer to the world they knew. It was long past the middle of the night when they finally saw the outline of their cottage, a hunched shape against the sky. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers. Their father sat at the rough table, his head in his hands. The stepmother stood by the hearth, arms crossed, face taut. When the door creaked open, and the children stepped inside, snow-dusted and exhausted, their father lifted his head as though waking from a nightmare. His eyes widened. "Hansel, Gretel," he whispered, as if he hardly believed they were real. He stood so quickly his chair fell over. You are alive." Gretel ran to him without thinking, throwing her arms around his waist. Hansel followed more slowly, watching his stepmother's face. It was set in a brittle mask, surprise quickly smothered beneath anger. "Where did you come from?" she demanded. "How did you find your way?" Hansel met her gaze. "The moon," he said simply, "and stones." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned away sharply, muttering under her breath about burdens and curses, and the forest never taking what it was given. Their father, though, clung to his children, as if afraid they might vanish again. That night they all slept a little closer. The cottage seemed less empty, though there was still the thin, raw ache of hunger. For a brief time, the stepmother said nothing more about the children. The woodcutter tried to find more work, trudging deeper into the forest, cutting what he could, but the coins he earned were still pitifully few. Another week passed. The bread grew stale, the flour dwindled, the nights felt harder. At last, the stepmother's patience snapped. It was late, the candles burned down almost to their wicks, and the children lay once more in their corner, half dozing. "We cannot do this again," the stepmother said. Her voice was calmer this time, colder. "You saw what happened. You did not take them far enough. They followed you home like dogs with their tails between their legs. And now, look, we are worse off than before. It is as though the forest itself refused your offering." Hansel stiffened. The sleep chased from his body in an instant. "There must be another way," the woodcutter said, but even he sounded tired of his own words now. "There is not," she replied flatly. "There is nothing left to sell, nothing left to trade. No one will lend to us. They can barely feed themselves. You will take them deeper tomorrow, far enough that even a trail of stars would not lead them back. If you return with them again, there will be nothing in this house for any of us. Not food, not warmth, not hope." The woodcutter's silence stretched long and thin. "You can curse me," she went on softly. "You can call me wicked in your heart, if it makes it easier. But if you do not take them, then you are the one choosing all our deaths. I am only telling you the truth." Hansel closed his eyes. He remembered the moonlight on the stones, the feel of Gretel's hand in his. He remembered the look in his father's eyes when he'd seen them standing in the doorway, alive. He slid out of the bed again when the house was quiet. But this time, when he reached for the door, his fingers met iron. The stepmother had slid the bolt on the inside. She had learned from the first time. He pressed his ear to the wood, listening to the stillness beyond. Then he stepped back, frustration prickling at his eyes. "Gretel," he whispered. She stirred. "What is it?" "The door is barred," he said. "I cannot fetch stones." Her face in the darkness was pale and serious. "What will we do?" Hansel thought hard, his mind chasing itself in circles. Then he remembered the small heels of bread, the crumbs that fell when you broke them. "We will use what we have," he murmured. "Tomorrow, when they give us bread, I will not eat mine. I will crumble it and drop pieces along the way instead. You must eat yours. I need you strong." "But what about you?" she asked. "I will be all right," he said, though he wasn't sure. "I will drink from the streams. I can go without longer. I am older. You must trust me." Gretel swallowed. "I do," she said simply. Morning came again, gray and pitiless. Their stepmother shoved them awake, not bothering with even a pretense of cheer. "Up," she said. "Your father will take you to gather more wood. It may be the last we get this winter." She handed them each a piece of bread, thinner than before, almost translucent with stinginess. Hansel slipped his into his pocket. Gretel, knowing the plan now, forced herself to eat hers slowly, even though her throat tried to close around it. The walk into the forest felt longer that day. Their father did not speak. The stepmother's lips were pressed tight, as if she were holding in not only words but doubts. The trees seemed taller, the spaces between them darker. Hansel let crumbs fall from his fingers when he could, dropping them onto roots and into clumps of moss, leaving a pale, fragile trail. Birds watched them from branches overhead with bright, unblinking eyes. They walked and walked. The air grew colder. The undergrowth thickened. Soon the path beneath their feet was no longer a path at all, just a weave of roots and fallen leaves. They came at last to a place where even their father seemed to hesitate. glancing back over his shoulder as if he could see the cottage from here despite the trees. "We will stop here," he said hoarsely. "Gather what wood you can. Stay together." His hand trembled as he set down his bundle. He knelt in front of them, his eyes roaming over their faces as if trying to memorize every freckle, every line. "Hansel," he said softly. "Gretel, whatever happens." He faltered. Then, with a voice roughened by something more than the cold, he said, "Forgive me." He stood and walked away before either of them could answer. The stepmother followed, not looking back. Hansel and Gretel stood in the silence that remained, the words hanging in the air like frost. He said, "Forgive me," Gretel whispered. Hansel nodded once, his jaw tight. "We will see," he said. "Come, let us sit on that log for a while. Then we will follow the crumbs." They sat. Time passed. The forest's noises grew thinner. Even the birds seemed cautious here. When the air began to bite at their fingertips and the sky dimmed, Hansel rose. "Let us find our trail," he said. But when they turned back the way they had come, searching the ground, they saw nothing. No pale crumbs, no scattered pieces of bread, only moss, only leaves. Gretel knelt, brushing aside the undergrowth, her fingers numb and frantic. "They must be here," she said. "Hansel, they must." A flutter of wings erupted nearby. A small brown bird hopped along a low branch, tilting its head as it watched them. Another bird landed beside it. Then another. Hansel followed their gaze and saw a single stray crumb caught in a tangle of roots, half pecked away. His stomach sank. "The birds!" he whispered. "They have eaten them." Gretel looked up, tears brimming. "All of them?" Hansel swallowed, his throat stiff. "Yes." The forest seemed to lean in closer, the trees surrounding them like a ring of silent onlookers. There was no way to tell which direction led home and which led deeper into the woods. Everything looked the same now, dark, tangled, unfamiliar. "What do we do?" Gretel asked, her voice trembling. "We walk," Hansel said, hearing how thin his own courage sounded. "We keep moving while there is light. We follow where the trees open. Perhaps we will find a path, a stream, a sign." "And if we do not?" "Then we keep moving," he repeated. "We cannot stay here and freeze." They chose a direction at random, trusting only to their instinct and the slight slope of the ground. The forest grew stranger as they walked. Roots twisted across their path like sleeping serpents. Holes gaped beneath tree trunks, black and deep. The light faded from gray to blue, and then to a slow, creeping dark that swallowed color. When night finally fell, they huddled beneath the shelter of an old, crooked fir tree. Its lower branches drooped close to the ground, forming a kind of curtain that shielded them from the worst of the wind. Hansel gathered fallen needles into a rough bed, and they curled together, seeking warmth from each other. Their stomachs groaned angrily. Their lips were dry. Every sound in the darkness seemed louder now. The crack of a branch, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of something unseen moving through the undergrowth. "Do you think there are wolves?" Gretel whispered. "Perhaps," Hansel said softly, "but wolves prefer sheep and deer. We are too much trouble." "That is not very comforting." Hansel gave a faint, tired smile. "I am doing my best." They lay awake for a long time, listening. "Do you think Father will come back for us?" Gretel asked eventually, voice small. Hansel thought of the way their father had looked at them before he left, the shine of his eyes, the tremble in his hands. He thought of the stepmother's cold certainty, the emptiness of the cupboard. "I think," he said slowly, "that he wanted to, but he is weak. He listens to fear more than to love." "Will we die here?" Gretel asked. Hansel felt something stubborn flare in his chest like a small, fierce flame. "No," he said, "we will not. The forest is large, yes, but so are we on the inside." He touched her hand. "We still have our wits. We still have our legs. Where there is breath, there is a path we have not yet tried. Gretel nodded into the dark. The words did not fill her belly, but they did loosen the knot of dread just a little. They slept at last, fitful and cold, dreaming of warmth that stayed just out of reach. Morning came pale and colorless. Their bodies ached, their lips were cracked, but they stood up, brushed the needles from their clothes, and began to walk again. They wandered for a long time. Sometimes they followed the sound of water, hoping it would lead to a stream where they could drink. Sometimes they followed the way the moss grew on the trees, or the faint suggestion of a path trodden by deer. They ate whatever they could find: sour berries, a few scattered nuts, leaves that tasted bitter and green. They drank from clear pools and trickling brooks. On the second day they passed the bleached bones of a deer, half buried in leaves. Gretel stepped closer, then flinched back as a crow hopped onto the skull, its head tilting, eyes bright and black. "Come away," Hansel said gently. "There is nothing there for us." "What if that is us soon?" she whispered. "It will not be," he said firmly. But each night grew colder, and each day stretched longer. Their legs felt heavy, their thoughts dull. Hope wore thin like fabric rubbed too often. It was on the third day, as the light slanted between the trees in long, golden shafts, that Gretel stopped suddenly, sniffing the air. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Hansel paused. At first, he smelled only damp bark and earth. Then, faintly, something else. Sweetness. It drifted through the trees like a whisper at first, barely noticeable. Then, with every step they took in that direction, it grew stronger, warm, sugary, unfamiliar in this harsh place. It made Hansel's mouth water and Gretel's knees tremble. "What is it?" she asked, voice hushed. Hansel shook his head. "I do not know, but—" He hesitated, then said what they were both thinking. "It smells like baking, like cakes, sugar." Gretel swallowed, her throat aching. "That cannot be right," she said. "Who would be baking cakes here?" "Someone," Hansel murmured, "or something." They followed the scent, drawn as much by hope as by hunger. The forest, which had felt so endless and tangled, began to open a little. The trees thinned. Light grew stronger. The scent grew thicker, wrapping around them like invisible fingers. At last, they stepped into a small clearing. For a moment, they simply stared. In the center of the clearing stood a house. Not a cottage like their father's, rough and crooked, but something out of a story told by firelight on kinder nights. Its walls were built of gingerbread, dark, spiced, and glazed to a subtle shine. Biscuits and sugared wafers tiled the roof. The window frames were lined with striped sticks like peppermint. The shutters looked to be made of layers of thin, brittle sugar. Along the edges of the roof hung garlands of candied fruit gleaming like jewels. The door frame was edged with icing in delicate patterns. The air around the house shimmered with heat and scent, as though the whole thing were fresh from the oven. Gretel's eyes widened. "Is it real?" she breathed. Hansel stepped forward, cautious but unable to resist. The house did not vanish. It did not change into a hollow tree or a rock. It remained what it appeared to be, a house made of sweets. His stomach cramped with longing. "Perhaps we should not," Gretel whispered, though her gaze was fixed hungrily on the sugared windowsill. Hansel hesitated. His mind, even exhausted, still tried to think beyond the immediate hunger. "If it is some kind of trap," he said slowly, "it is a clever one. But we are already lost, already starving. If we do nothing, we will die. If we eat, we might not." Gretel looked at him, then at the house. The smell was almost unbearable now, a teasing caress at the edge of her senses. "Just a little," she said, almost pleading. Hansel nodded and stepped closer. He reached out a cautious hand and broke off a small corner of something like sugared glass from the windowsill. It snapped cleanly. He sniffed it, then touched it to his tongue. Flavor exploded in his mouth. Sweet and sharp and rich in a way he had forgotten food could be. It melted as he pressed it to the roof of his mouth. "It is real," he said hoarsely. "Gretel, here." He broke a piece off and handed it to her. She took it with shaking fingers, placing it gently on her tongue. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, and a soft sound escaped her lips, half relief, half disbelief. "It is like," she searched for the word, "like a feast put into one bite." The hunger that had been gnawing at them yawned wider, suddenly sharpened by the memory of satisfaction. They began to break off more pieces, small at first, then larger. Sugared tiles, crumbs of gingerbread, shards of biscuit. They ate greedily, unaware of how loud their chewing sounded in the quiet clearing. So caught were they in this desperate pleasure that they did not hear the first creak of the door. They barely heard the second. It was only when a voice floated out to them, thin and sing-song, that they froze. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse," it crooned softly. "Who is nibbling at my house?" Hansel and Gretel stiffened. Pieces of sugar and biscuit hung from their fingers. Slowly they turned. The door had opened. In the shadow of the doorway stood an old woman, bent and thin, leaning heavily on a wooden stick. Her hair, what little there was of it, hung in straggling wisps around a face lined deeply with age. Her skin was pale and almost translucent in places, like old parchment held up to the light. But her eyes were bright, too bright. They glittered like shards of glass, sharp and watchful. "Well," she said, and when she smiled, her teeth showed small and strangely pointed. "What have we here?" Hansel's first instinct was to apologize, to stammer that they had been hungry, that they meant no harm. But his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, glued there by sugar and fear. Gretel managed to whisper, We are sorry. We were lost and hungry." "We did not mean." The old woman raised a hand, palm outwards, and Gretel fell silent. "Lost, are you?" the woman said, her voice soft and almost kind. "Hungry?" "Yes, I can see that." Her gaze roamed over them, slow and deliberate, taking in the hollows beneath their eyes, the sharpness of their cheeks, the threadbare quality of their clothes. "Children should not wander alone in the forest," she went on. "It is no place for such small, soft creatures. Why, anything might happen to you." Hansel swallowed. There was something in the way she said that anything might happen that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The old woman's expression softened, the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepening. "But you are here now," she said, "and you have found my little house. My. I do not often have visitors. Come in, come in. No need to stand out there in the cold, nibbling at the walls like mice. There is food inside. Real food. Warm beds, too. You must be so tired." Gretel swayed a little. The idea of warmth, of a bed, of more food that was not stolen from the walls, made her bones ache with longing. Hansel hesitated. "Why would you help us?" he blurted, the words out before he could stop them. The old woman's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment something sharp flashed there, too quick to name. Then it was gone, replaced by a wounded sort of smile. "Because I remember," she said quietly. "I remember what it is to be hungry until your thoughts blur. I remember cold that creeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I remember being young and lost and alone. And I remember wishing that someone, anyone, would take pity on me." She shook her head. "No one did. So now I do what I wished others would have done. Is that so strange?" Hansel flushed, ashamed of his suspicion, even though some quiet instinct still tugged at him. Gretel touched his arm. "Please," she whispered. "Hansel, I do not think I can walk much further. If we refuse her, what then? Back into the forest? Back to nothing?" He looked at her, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint tremble in her limbs. He thought of another night beneath the bare branches, another morning waking with their tongues stuck to the roofs of their mouths from thirst. He nodded once. "Thank you, grandmother," he said cautiously, using the respectful word. "We are grateful." The old woman's smile deepened. "Come in, then," she murmured. "Come in, my lambs." They stepped across the threshold. The air inside the house was warm and thick with scent, spices, sugar, something savory underneath. Candles burned in iron holders along the walls, their flames steady. A great iron stove squatted against one side of the room, its mouth glowing faintly, heat radiating from it in waves. On the table sat a loaf of bread, whole and soft, not yet cut. A pot simmered over the fire, sending up gentle curls of steam. Gretel's head swam. The old woman guided them to chairs at the table, her hands surprisingly strong on their shoulders. "Sit, sit," she said. "You can barely stand, the pair of you. No need to be shy here, there is enough." She cut them thick slices of bread, spread with something rich and golden. She ladled out bowls of stew, the scent making their eyes sting with gratitude. She placed mugs of warm milk in front of them. They ate as though nothing else had ever mattered, tears blurring their vision. The old woman watched them, her bright eyes intent. She did not eat, but she smiled and made soft little sounds of approval. "Good, good," she murmured. "That is better. We must put flesh back on those bones. Children should not rattle when they walk." When they had eaten until their stomachs could hold no more, they sagged in their chairs, dull with warmth and fullness. The old woman clicked her tongue. "Look at you," she said. "Half asleep already. Come, let me show you where you can rest." She led them into a small adjoining room where two neat little beds were made up with soft feather mattresses and thick quilts. The sight of them was almost more than the children could bear. "You may sleep here," the old woman said. "In the morning we will see about chores and such. I am old, you see. It is not so easy to keep house alone. But that is for tomorrow. Tonight, you rest." Hansel and Gretel murmured their thanks. Poor as their father was, he had taught them manners, and habits cling even in strange places. Gretel climbed into one of the beds and sank into it with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside her. Hansel hesitated a moment, looking back towards the main room. The old woman met his gaze. "Something wrong, child?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I just wanted to say thank you again." Her eyes softened. "Sleep, Hansel," she said gently. "You are safe here." The word safe settled oddly in his ears, heavy and fragile at once. But he was so tired. The warmth and the food and the softness of the bed all conspired against his lingering unease. He lay down. The mattress embraced him. Gretel's breathing slowed in the next bed. The candlelight dimmed to a soft blur. The last thing he saw before sleep pulled him under was the faint shape of the old woman's shadow on the wall, stretched long and thin by the fire's glow. For a heartbeat, it seemed to move in a way that did not match her body. Morning came with a strange softness. Hansel woke slowly, as though rising through warm water. For a brief, blissful moment, he forgot where he was. The bed beneath him was too soft to be his own. The air smelled of sugar and wood smoke. Then memory returned. The forest, the house, the old woman. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The room was empty. Gretel's bed was made neatly, though the dent in the mattress showed where she had been. "Gretel," he called. No answer. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. His body felt stronger than it had in days, the weakness softened by rest and food. He padded barefoot out into the main room. It looked different somehow. The candles were unlit, the room dim, the fire in the stove was lower. On the table sat no bread, no stew. The air felt heavier. "Gretel?" he said again. A movement to his left made him turn. The old woman stood by the stove, her back to him. The lines of her shoulders seemed sharper now, the curve of her spine more pronounced. She turned slowly to face him. For the first time, Hansel truly saw her. The pallor of her skin was not just age. It had a waxy quality, as though light did not quite want to touch it. Her fingers were long and thin, the joints knobbly, the nails thickened and yellowish. Her eyes, so bright before, seemed almost too bright now, shining in the dimness with a hungry intelligence. "Good morning, my chick," she said. Her voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, a rasp, a crackle like dry leaves. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Hansel said slowly. "But where is Gretel?" The old woman's smile widened, showing more of her small, sharp teeth. "Ah, your little sister is already working. She is a helpful girl. I have many tasks for such quick hands. She is outside, fetching water, sweeping. Do not worry." Her eyes glinted. "I am taking good care of her." Hansel frowned. "I will help," he said. "We can both work. We do not wish to be a burden." "You will not be a burden long," the old woman said softly. Something in her tone made his skin prickle. He took a small step back. Without warning, she moved. It was a shocking, sudden thing. The slow, shuffling old woman vanished. In her place was something quick and purposeful. She crossed the room in a heartbeat, her hand darting out with claw-like speed. Hansel tried to flinch away, but her grip closed around his arm like an iron band. "Let go!" he cried, struggling. The old woman's face loomed close, her breath hot and sour. "Oh no, little chick," she murmured. "You came to my house, you ate my food, you slept in my beds. Do you know what that makes you?" Hansel's heart hammered against his ribs. "A guest?" he managed, though the words sounded frail even to him. Her smile sharpened. "A meal," she said. Before he could shout, before he could twist away, she dragged him across the room with surprising strength. He stumbled, feet scraping against the floor, trying to dig in his heels. But she was old in years only. In will and cunning, she was something else entirely. She hauled him to a small, iron-barred cage at the far side of the room, a thing he had not noticed in the softer light of the night before. It sat half in shadow, its door hanging open like a waiting mouth. "No!" Hansel shouted. "No, please!" "Save your breath," the old woman said dryly. "You will need it later." She shoved him into the cage. He fell hard, hands scraping on the rough floor. Before he could scramble up, the door clanged shut behind him. He heard the scrape of a bolt being thrown into place. He flung himself at the bars, fingers wrapping around them. "Let me out!" he cried. "Gretel! Gretel!" Gretel appeared in the doorway at that, a bucket in her hands, her face pale and startled. She took in the scene in a single, shattering glance. The cage! Hansel's hands on the bars, the old woman's satisfied expression. "What are you doing to him?" she gasped. The old woman turned to her, her smile smooth as if someone had painted it on. "Ah, my sweet," she said. "There you are. I was just explaining to your brother how things are here. He is to stay in there for a while, you see. He is very, very thin, skin and bones. We must feed him well, fatten him up. It would be such a waste otherwise." Gretel stared, not comprehending. "Fatten him? For what?" The old woman's eyes glittered. "For the oven, of course," she said, as if surprised she needed to explain such a simple thing. "You did not think all this sugar and sweetness came without a price, did you?" Gretel's knees wobbled. The bucket slipped from her grasp and hit the floor, water sloshing out across the boards. "You cannot," she whispered. "You cannot eat him. He is my brother." "And I am hungry," the old woman replied calmly. "Do you know what hunger is, child? True hunger? The kind that makes your bones ache and your thoughts turn sour. The kind that makes the world narrow down to the space between your tongue and your teeth." "I know hunger," Gretel said, voice shaking. "We have starved in that forest." We have gone days without food. Have you now? The old woman's mouth twisted. Then you understand. That emptiness, that gnawing. It does not simply vanish because you think it wicked. It stays. It whispers. For years I starved while others feasted behind walls of stone and wood. They would not share their bread, their meat, so I learned other ways to eat. She stepped closer, her gaze hardening, and now you will learn other ways to serve. She seized Gretel's wrist. Gretel tried to pull away, but the old woman's grip was iron. Listen to me, the witch said. The word witch slid into Gretel's mind then, finally finding its place. You will work. You will clean my house, fetch my water, light my fire. You will feed your brother rich, heavy food every day until he is plump. If you do not, I will eat you first. Do you understand? Gretel's breath came in sharp little gasps. Her eyes flicked to Hansel, who shook his head wildly, fingers tight on the bars. Do not do it, he cried. Do not listen to her. Run, Gretel, run. The witch laughed, a dry, choked sound. Run where? She asked. Back into the forest that nearly killed you? Back to parents who abandoned you? No, little chick. You are mine now, both of you. You will find there are worse things than thick stew and hard work. She leaned closer to Gretel. Answer me, girl. Do you understand? Gretel swallowed. Her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. But there was nowhere to go. Nowhere safe, now, just like before. Yes, she whispered. The witch's smile returned. Good girl. We will get along just fine. And so began their second captivity. The days blurred into one another. Each morning, the witch thrust food through the bars of Hansel's cage. Meat, bread soaked in dripping, thick gravy, cakes dense with nuts and honey. At first, Hansel ate eagerly, his body crying out for nourishment. But as the horror of what the food was meant to do settled in him, each bite became a struggle. You must eat, Gretel whispered whenever she could steal a moment close to the cage. If you do not, she will notice. She will grow impatient. We need time. Hansel looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. Time for what? He asked. There is no way out, not for me. We do not know that, she said fiercely. We survived the forest. We can survive this. But not if she grows angry and decides you are good enough for her oven. So he ate. The witch watched carefully, her bright eyes moving between them. Every few days she would grip Hansel's arm through the bars or press her bony fingers against his cheeks, judging. Then she would order him to put his hand through the bars. My eyes are not what they were, she grumbled. I cannot see if you are plump. Give me your finger. Hansel, thinking quickly, found a thin bone in the straw from some earlier meal, a small knuckle left behind. Each time she demanded his finger, he held out the bone instead. Her fingers closed around it. So thin, she muttered, still so thin. Useless. We must fatten you more. Gretel's chores were relentless. She swept the floors until her back ached. She scrubbed pots until her fingers were raw. She hauled water from the well. She chopped wood for the stove, the axe heavy in her small hands. The witch watched with satisfaction. You are useful, she remarked one evening as Gretel wiped soot from the stove. I may keep you longer. A strong pair of hands is not so easy to find. The boy, however. Boys are like weeds. They pop up everywhere and are good for little but burning. Gretel said nothing, but as she worked, she watched. The witch's movements, her routines, the way she checked the oven, the moments when her guard dropped. She noticed the way the witch bent to peer into the oven whenever she was testing the heat, the way her stick leaned against the wall when she stoked the fire. She stored these small observations away in her mind like Hansel had stored his stones. At night, when the witch finally slept in her own narrow bed, her snores rattling softly, Gretel crept as close as she dared to Hansel's cage. "We must find a way," she whispered. Hansel pressed his face against the bars, the metal cold against his cheek. "I do not see one," he admitted. "The door is locked. The bars are strong. Even if I broke them, she would wake. She is not as slow as she looks. You have seen it. She moves like a striking snake when she chooses." "Then we must strike first," Gretel said. He blinked at her. "You?" "Why not me?" she asked, anger and fear churning together in her chest. "I am not made of sugar and smoke. I am flesh, bone, thought. If she means to eat you, if she threatens to eat me, what choice is there?" Hansel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are braver than I am," he said quietly. "That is not true," Gretel replied. "You are clever. You brought us back with your stones. You got us as far as this house. Now it must be my turn. We share this." They spoke in whispers of the oven. "It is large," Gretel said softly. "Big enough to roast a whole pig, I think, or—" She swallowed. "Or a boy." Hansel shuddered. "She checks it often," Gretel continued. "She opens the door and sticks her head in to see if the heat is right. I am the one who brings the wood, who feeds the fire. She makes me watch. You must learn," she says, "so you can prepare your brother properly when the time comes." Hansel's hands clenched into fists. "One day soon," Gretel went on, "she will say he is fat enough. She will tell me to help. But I will not help her. I will help you." "How?" he asked. She took a breath, letting the idea settle into words. "When she asks me to check the oven, I will say I am stupid, that I do not know how. She will lose patience. She will show me. That is when—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Hansel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something steady in them. "It is dangerous," he said, "if you fail." "If I do nothing, you die," she said. "I die? Our bones join the others in the forest. I would rather fail trying." He gave a small, grim smile. "You sound like father, when he still believed things could be better." "Perhaps he once taught us something after all," she replied. Days passed. The witch grew more irritable, her hunger sharpening into anger. One morning, after feeling Hansel's false finger yet again, she snarled, "That is enough. My patience is gone. Fat or thin, I will eat him soon. I am not waiting until I crumble into dust." "Girl!" Gretel stiffened. "Yes?" "Stoke the oven," the witch snapped. "We will have a grand feast tonight. I will gnaw his bones clean." Gretel's hands shook as she carried wood to the stove, but she forced herself to move steadily. She fed logs into the mouth of the oven, watching the flames leap and curl. The heat pressed against her face, making her eyes water. The witch hovered nearby, muttering to herself, occasionally glancing at Hansel's cage with a look that made Gretel's stomach twist. "Is it hot enough?" the witch demanded at last. Gretel stared at the fire. The oven roared quietly, heat shimmering in the air above it. She could feel it on her skin, but she shook her head. I do not know," she said, letting her voice wobble. "I do not understand these things. I am just a stupid girl." The witch sneered. "Stupid indeed. What use are hands if the head holds nothing? Come here." Gretel stepped back slightly. "I am afraid," she said. "The fire." "Oh, for pity's sake," the witch snapped. "It is not so hard, look." She limped towards the oven, leaning heavily on her stick. "You open the door like this, you see, and you put your head in. You feel the heat. If it licks your face like a flame licking fat, then it is ready." She grasped the iron handle and tugged. The door swung open with a low groan, and a wave of hot air rolled out, wrapping around them. The witch bent forward, her head moving closer to the dark mouth of the oven. Gretel's heart pounded. She looked at Hansel. He met her gaze through the bars. He nodded once. The witch ducked her head further into the oven. "Do you see?" she was saying. "You just—" Gretel moved. All the fear, all the hunger, all the cold, all the nights spent listening to her stepmother's murmured cruelties, all the days watching her brother slowly fatten for slaughter. She poured it all into that one desperate shove. Her hand struck the witch's back hard. The old woman stumbled forward, her stick clattering to the floor. She let out a shriek, high and startled, as her upper body tumbled into the oven's open mouth. Her hands scrabbled at the edges, claws scraping against iron. Gretel grabbed the door. For a moment it felt impossibly heavy. Then Hansel, from within his cage, threw himself against the bars, the rattle of iron echoing through the room. "Gretel!" he shouted. "Now!" She screamed, not in fear this time, but in effort, and heaved. The door slammed shut with a ringing clang, catching the witch half inside. There was a muffled scream, then a flurry of thuds and scratches from within. Gretel seized the iron bar that held the door in place and rammed it through, locking it. Her hands burned against the hot metal. The smell inside the cottage changed, shifting slowly from the sharp, clean scent of burning wood to something darker, thicker. The witch's screams rose, then fell, then turned to hoarse shrieks, then to a horrible choking sound. Gretel covered her ears, shaking. Hansel pressed his forehead against the bars, eyes tightly closed. Eventually, there was only the crackle of the fire. The witch's voice had vanished. Gretel stood there, chest heaving, arms trembling, ears ringing with the echoes of what she had done. The room seemed to tilt. "Gretel," Hansel said softly. "The key." She blinked, dragged back to the moment. The key, yes, on the wall beside the cage, hanging from a nail. She stumbled to it, grabbed it, and fumbled with the lock. It turned with a jolt. The cage door swung open. Hansel stepped out slowly, like someone leaving a dream. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then he walked to Gretel, and they fell into each other's arms, clinging so tightly it almost hurt. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You did it." Her breath hitched. "I was so afraid I would not be strong enough." "You were," he said. "You are." They stayed like that for a long time, until the heat from the oven grew too intense and they had to move away. "What do we do now?" Gretel asked at last. Hansel looked around the cottage, at the strange, sweet walls and the heavy stove and the locked door that now meant nothing. "We leave," he said, "but not empty-handed." In the small room where they had slept, they found chests and boxes hidden under the beds, behind loose boards, beneath piles of old cloth. Inside were coins, glittering gold, delicate silver, jewels that shone even in the dim light, treasures taken from others who had wandered, others who had not escaped. Gretel's throat tightened as she lifted a small necklace, its chain fine as cobweb, its pendant a single, clear stone. "Do you think she took this from another girl?" she asked softly. "Perhaps," Hansel said. "We cannot return it. But we can make sure their deaths were not entirely wasted. We can live. We can build something better than hunger and fear." They filled their pockets with as much as they could carry without being weighed down, tucking coins into the linings of their clothes, slipping small jewels into hidden seams. Then they stepped out of the house. The air outside felt different now, fresher. The clearing no longer seemed quite so enchanted. The gingerbread walls looked less magical and more grotesque. Sugar and spice over the bones of something cruel. Gretel shivered. "Will anyone else come here?" she asked. Hansel looked back at the house for a long moment. The roof sagged slightly. A crack was forming in one of the sugared panes. Without its mistress, the magic that held it together seemed to be faltering. "I do not think it will stand much longer," he said. "The forest will take it back. Let it." They stepped into the trees once more. This time, the forest did not feel like a mouth ready to swallow them. It still loomed, yes, its shadows still deep, but the terror that had once pressed at their backs had lessened. They had faced something worse than the woods and survived. Still, they were not foolish. They walked carefully, watching for landmarks. The curve of a stream, the shape of a particular twisted oak, the way the ground sloped. The sun moved slowly overhead, and Hansel tried to keep its position in mind, using it as a rough guide. Days passed again, but they were not the same days as before. The children were thin still, but no longer hollow with hunger. They drank from clear streams and shared what little they could forage. When night fell, they curled up together, but sleep came more easily now. The worst horror, they felt, had already been faced and beaten. On the second afternoon, Gretel stopped suddenly, staring ahead. "Do you recognize that?" she asked. Hansel followed her gaze. In the distance, through a thinner patch of trees, he could see something that made his heart leap. A familiar rise in the land, the pale line of a path worn by human feet. He squinted, then gasped. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I know that hill. If we follow it down, I think we may see." They began to run. Branches slapped at their arms. Roots snatched at their ankles, but they hardly felt it. They scrambled down the slope, bursting through the last tangle of undergrowth. There, in the fading light, stood a small, crooked cottage at the edge of the forest. Its roof sagged, its chimney leaned, and its door hung slightly ajar. Smoke did not curl from the chimney. The small pile of wood by the wall was nearly gone. But it was home. Gretel slowed, breathless. "Do you think?" she began. Hansel nodded, swallowing hard. "We must see." They walked up the narrow path, their feet remembering each stone. Hansel reached out and pushed the door fully open. Inside, the air was heavy and quiet. Their father sat at the table, his head bowed, hands clasped as though in prayer. Though no words left his lips, he looked thinner than ever, his hair more gray, his shoulders more bent. He lifted his head slowly at the sound of the door. For a second, his eyes did not seem to understand what they saw. Two children, older than before, thinner, but with something steadier in their gaze. Then recognition crashed over him like a wave. "Hansel," he whispered. "Gretel." He stood so abruptly that his chair toppled backward with a clatter. He did not notice. He stumbled towards them, hands outstretched, and they flew into his arms. For a long time, there were no words, only the rough, broken sounds of his sobs and their own quieter, shuddering breaths. He held them as though afraid they might dissolve if he let go. "I thought you dead," he gasped. "I thought I have not slept, not truly, not since." He broke off, glancing towards the empty corner where their stepmother's belongings had once been. "She fell ill not long after. Or perhaps it was her conscience that ate her. She went to bed one night and did not wake. I buried her myself. I thought it punishment for what we had done." Hansel and Gretel exchanged a look over his shoulder. They felt many things in that moment: sorrow, anger, compassion, confusion. The story of their stepmother had ended without them, as such stories sometimes do. "We nearly did die," Hansel said quietly. "The forest was cruel, but we found a house. There was a witch." He told their father as much as he could bear to speak, skimming over the worst details, though his father still flinched and paled at each new horror. Gretel filled in the gaps gently, her eyes never leaving his face. When they finished, silence settled in the cottage again. "I have wronged you," their father whispered at last. "There are no words to excuse it. Fear does not excuse it. Hunger does not excuse it. I listened to the loudest voice in the room, and it was not love. I can never undo it. All I can do is beg your forgiveness." Hansel and Gretel looked at him. They saw not only the man who had left them in the forest, but the man who had once held their hands as they crossed streams, who had carved small toys for them on winter evenings, who had carried them on his back when they were too small to walk far. Gretel stepped forward and took his rough hands in hers. "You were weak," she said softly, "and you let someone's cruelty guide you. But we have seen worse monsters now. You are not one of them." Hansel nodded, though his throat was tight. "We are here," he said, "alive, and we will not spend the rest of our lives looking only backwards. We have been through darkness. Let us build something else now." Their father's eyes overflowed again, but his shoulders, for the first time in a long time, seemed to straighten a little. Gretel reached into her pocket then, feeling the hard shapes there. "We did not come back empty-handed," she said, trying for a small smile. She tipped a handful of coins onto the table. Gold gleamed dully in the dim light. Hansel did the same, adding silver and a few small jewels that caught the glow from the window. Their father stared, astonished. "Where?" "From the witch's house," Hansel said. "Payment, perhaps, for all the children she took. It seemed wrong to leave it there to rot. We will use it carefully." "We will never be rich in the way lords and merchants are rich," Gretel added. "But we will not be hungry, not like before." Their father sank into a chair, hands trembling. "Then we may truly live," he murmured. "We may fix the roof, buy flour, perhaps even help others when their cupboards are bare, so they do not make the terrible choice I did." "Yes," Hansel said, "that would be a start." The cottage felt different that evening. The walls were the same. The floor creaked in the same places. The wind still rattled at the shutters. But there was a new warmth there, a quiet resolve, a softness that had been missing for a long time. They ate that night by candlelight. Simple food, but enough. Their father kept reaching out, as if to reassure himself that his children were real, here, solid. Hansel and Gretel spoke of small things for a while. The weight of snow on branches, the sound of owls, the way the witch's cat had watched them from the rafters with bored yellow eyes. Later, when they lay in their shared bed once more, the straw mattress under them and their single blanket stretched across both their bodies, Gretel stared at the shadowed ceiling. "Do you think," she said quietly, "that we are the same as before?" Hansel thought about it. About the forest, the house of sweets, the cage, the oven, the witch's screams, the feel of iron in his hands as he stepped out of that small prison. About the way Gretel had pushed, the strength she had found. "No," he said at last, "we are not the same." "Is that bad?" she asked. He reached for her hand in the dark. "We have seen more than children should," he said, "but we have also learned more than most ever do. We know what hunger can make people do, we know what fear can twist, and we know that even in the darkest places there is a choice." Gretel was quiet for a moment. "I will remember that," she said. "If I ever feel hard inside like she did, I will remember that I can choose." Hansel squeezed her hand. "So will I." Outside, the forest whispered to itself. It would always be there, vast and shadowed and full of secrets. Somewhere within its depths, the remains of a sugared house were slowly crumbling, its sweetness dissolving back into the earth. The witch who had fed upon fear and hunger was nothing but ashes. But in the small cottage at the edge of the trees, a different story was taking root, one of hard-earned mercy, quiet strength, and the kind of love that chose, again and again, not to abandon. Hansel and Gretel slept. For the first time in a long time, their dreams were not filled with empty cupboards, dark cages, or burning ovens. Instead, they dreamed of paths through the forest that led not to loss, but to clearings full of light, where nothing waited for them but simple, honest days. And in the morning, when the sun rose and laid its thin, hopeful light across the cottage roof, they woke to a world that, though still hard, no longer felt quite so cruel. Together, they stepped into it.